Hello, good evening. First of all, thank you for taking the time to listen to what I have to say tonight. My name is Philip Lee Harvey and I'm a travel location photographer based in London in the UK. So tonight I want to talk a little bit about what I do, why I do it, and the kind of adventures and things I've learned along the way. So the first picture that's up on the screen today, in a way, sums up what I do. It is quite varied, but it has themes that I really like. One of those, of course, being strong graphic composition, and the other one being the use of daylight. Most of my work comes from the travel sector, whether it's for hotels or magazines, and for advertising agencies as well. So I'm going to start off a little bit about how I began. I've been a photographer for, well, over 20 years now, probably 22 years, I think. Obviously, I started very young. But when I began, I did the very normal way into photography, I guess. I studied a degree in graphic design at Norwich School of Art here in the UK. And then I went on to assist some other photographers. I was very fortunate that I worked with some very good people. And that certainly set the level high on the kind of work I wanted to achieve when I started. So I became a photographer on my own, age 24. In the beginning, I knew I wanted to do travel, but I didn't have any money to go anywhere, and nobody would have commissioned me in those days because I had nothing to prove that I could do it. So I started to create these almost drawings. They were almost like paintings because painting was part of my background. So this image, for example, was actually inspired by the savannas of Kenya, East Africa. It's actually photographed in a studio in North London. When I first started, I was very much into experimentation and colour theory. That will come more into this lecture as we go on. So there's a very young me in Ladakh, Indian Himalayas. You can see here there's a Fuji film camera there. Yeah, I started on film and was quite late to go to digital. And in fact, it was only an underwater shoot that made digital the way for me to go. The idea that I could go underwater and come back with 36 pictures, not knowing whether I've got it or whether I could come back and see that I've got the image I need immediately. That was what eventually took me over to working on digital. I don't miss film at all. I get asked about it a lot, but I'm pleased that I learnt that way. Technically, you learn a lot when you're shooting on film, especially on transparency or slide film, because you can't make mistakes in the same way with exposure that you can these days with modern technology that's there. So this trip was a self-initiated trip, meaning it wasn't for a job. I went to India. I'd already started doing editorial magazine commissions in the UK, and I decided after a while that I needed to prove that I could do travel. So this first big trip of mine, I think I was about 26, 27, I went to Indian Himalayas, and this portrait was what, in a way, really started everything for me. It's a portrait of a young novice monk boy at the Lama Yuru temple complex in Ladakh. I look back on this picture now with fondness because it already started to hint at all the things I like. The simplistic colour, the strong composition, and the painterly quality, which I now rely on quite a lot for my inspiration. It also won quite a few awards, which really helped me to sort of launch my career, if you like. So we're going to go through, first of all, with images from my portfolio, and I'll tell you a little bit about them, and sometimes the things that went well and where I was lucky, and sometimes when it didn't go so well, which is what happens. And I call myself a travel and location photographer. I think it's very difficult to put labels on yourself. I just love working outside, and I love exploring, and I love meeting people from different cultures and seeing different landscapes. So this is in Teltopain National Park in southern Chile. I was photographing there for Lonely Planet magazine. We were doing a feature all over Chile. And as luck would have it, the snow came at just the right time. It wasn't so bad that we couldn't get there, but when we got there, it just had enough to make the images interesting. You're seeing a lot of my work, negative space, a lot of empty space around. And that's because it's nearly all shot for magazines or for advertisements. And so where the words go is really important. And coming from a graphic design background, I very much understand that. And I quite like text and words over my images. When I'm taking pictures, I'm thinking, where can the headlines go? And also you'll see a lot of space where it looks like there's a picture on the left and a picture on the right. That's because it's designed as a picture as a double page in a magazine. So these things are very important to me, because I think when you take a picture, it has to be usable for your clients, whether that is as a single page or whether it's a double page. This is always happy days for me. This is in Kenya. I spent a lot of time working there, and especially with the Maasai. This was a scene I'd witnessed the day before, but the light wasn't very good. But it gave me a chance to do, in a way, a bit of a recce, and realise that this man would bring the goats back into the corral the same time every day as the sun was setting. So I placed my vehicle in such a position that I could stand on the top to get this image. You see the dark line at the very top of the picture. That is actually, it shouldn't be there, but I left it in. I don't mind it. And what it is, it's my hand trying to shield more of the sun from causing flare on the lens. But I quite often leave things in if it's like a happy accident. I don't, that doesn't bother me at all. This is in a place called Lucknow in India. I was there for Condé Nast Traveller magazine, a very popular travel magazine in the UK and the US. And I'd heard that there was a group of villagers who would go and take snakes out of people's villages, and they were snake charmers. But what I'd heard was that they had built up an immune system to a snake bite, a cobra in this case. You see he has one around his neck and one in his hair. I really don't like snakes. I have a real problem with them, but this was such an interesting story. I wanted to go and photograph them. I don't believe they do have an immune system to snake bites. I think that they take the venom out before they perform their tricks. Even so, I wouldn't give any of them a hug. I spent a lot of time with different cowboys and gauchos over the years. I grew up on a farm, and so country ways of life are very interesting to me, and I've had the opportunity to spend a lot of time with different people around the world living that outdoor life. And I'm sure that one of the reasons I do what I do is because I grew up with a love of the countryside and being outside. The picture on the left is Outback Australia. This I put in my portfolio because I like the body language between the horse's ear and the man. These two go out every morning to check the fences, and they sort of built up, it looks like a friendship in a way. And the guy on the right is from Andalusia in southern Spain. This is in Japan. I was in Hokkaido, and then I went from there down to the Japanese Alps, and I was going to be photographing the snow monkeys, but there was too much snow, so I couldn't get there. So I ended up looking around the hotel, and the lady that was showing me around said, well, normally, I must apologise, normally I would wear traditional dress. And then suddenly I had this idea that I could still get some pictures if I photographed the owner of the hotel, and this was in her onsen. This was shot for the, I don't know if I'm going too fast at the moment for your catch-up time, but this image of the two felucca boats was shot on the Nile in Egypt. It was photographed for the Egyptian tourist board. I've done quite a lot of work with tourist boards, and often to help them once they something has happened that stopped people going there. Like, for example, COVID now, we're quite busy now trying to help destinations get back on the map. This is in Koasok National Park. Although the weather is what makes my pictures, I think, or the weather and the light is a very key ingredient, sometimes it doesn't work that way. Things go wrong, and this was I was photographing this scene, and it had been raining for what felt like hours, but we still went out in the boat, we waited, and sometimes patience pays off, and we got literally maybe 10-15 seconds of bright light on this jungle before it went again. But I quite like those challenges. I think it keeps you excited, if slightly annoying at times. So this, I'll come on to a little bit more about how this shot came about later on when I talk about finding inspiration. But this is in Westlake, China. These also are from the same scene, the same destination. I love working in black and white. You don't often get a chance to commercially, but it doesn't mean that, you know, as a photographer and image maker, I shouldn't do it. Every year I try to go somewhere just for myself, without any commercial reason to go, without any restrictions. But I still like to set myself a challenge or a brief, because I think otherwise you end up with just lots of random pictures. This is off the island of Socotra. Socotra is owned by Yemen. This is the Arabian Sea, and I was doing a story about the influence of folklore has in this part of the world. Happens to be the most pirated sea in the world as well, so we were certainly keeping an eye out. This picture of the rice fields, this is actually taken from the car park of Angkor Wat in Cambodia. I remember my guide saying we must go to the temple, it will get filled up, it will get busy, but I had a feeling that there was something about these palms that I really liked. The palms, these particular palms are the symbol of Cambodia, and I'd stopped to take pictures purely of the landscape. That was enough for me. And then, as luck would have it, I saw the man on the left-hand side walk along the fence line, turn, and went exactly the right place. And you can see I photographed it knowing that this would become a double page, and there would be a picture of the man on one side and one of the big trees on the other. This is in Argentina. I spent a week with these gauchos on their ranch. A beautiful place to be, a beautiful part of the world. And I really love it when you're photographing people do what they normally do. And this guy gets up every morning and in the corral, he gets all the horses ready to take them out into the pastures. The scene was already there for me, really. The one on the left is in Tunisia, taken quite a while ago now, but it was one of my first adventures into any kind of desert. I remember it well because I decided, maybe foolishly, to shoot it all on 4x5 large plate cameras, which is not the best idea to do in a desert, but as I said, I like a challenge. The one on the right is the Grand Mosque in Casablanca. And what was amazing about this mosque was that it was a place of worship, but it was also a meeting place where everyone, tourists and locals alike, went every evening to chat. And so I love the idea of the strength and power of the mosque with just a young child playing. Again, I try to bring the elements down as much as I can to keep things as simple and graphic as possible. Enough to tell the message, but not so much that you actually take the inspiration. And I sometimes think that the viewer makes up the picture. So if you don't give them all the information, they can use their imagination. This next picture is coming up for you now is of a sand diver in Mali, West Africa. This guy has an incredibly dangerous job. He dives down, free dives, to collect sand for the building industry on the Niger River. And the lighting is really important to me, as I said, and I love different types of lighting can help convey a different message. This was actually lit using silver reflectors. I'm in another boat, hanging the camera over the edge, and I wanted that moment when he was potentially taking his last breath. So to me, the way he was breathing was important, and his hand on that rope was important. That was his lifeline. One of the things I love about my job is it's so varied. I can be photographing people in East Africa, the Maasai, for example, or people up in Arctic Norway, and then I can be asked to go to Galapagos, for example. And I love the fact that I'm not one type of photographer. You know, I don't want to be just known as a wildlife photographer or a documentary photographer. I put a different head on when I get asked to do different jobs. And I like taking influences from one genre of photography and moving them into another. So for example, here we've got different continents, but I still am very interested in the light, the graphic simplicity of the images. The one on the left is Zambia, and the guy on the right comes from a story I did about Rudyard Kipling in India. We were very lucky to get that picture. It was the last hour of the last day of a 10-day shoot. We didn't have any pictures of tigers, so it was a very important picture to get that. These top left is Zambia again, and the other two are both in Amboseli National Park. As I said, I've spent a lot of time there. I love the fact that that there is life, not just of the wildlife, but the connection with the people and the landscape. Well, all over East Africa, but my heart really is in Kenya. Maybe because I've worked there a lot, but I've always had a great time there. And it's got a lot more for me to see. And I think with Amboseli, you've got Kilimanjaro in the background, which is a really great backdrop to see wildlife. I try to sometimes not get too close when I'm photographing wildlife. I like to see them in their habitat. The picture on the right was a cover for a travel magazine, and that actually said to me before, it would be great if we could have a shot with a giraffe, an acacia tree and Kilimanjaro, which is not as easy to get as you think. And I kind of laughed at the time when they asked me, but we got lucky in the end, perseverance. And you can see there's a lot of space around that picture, and that's because I knew it would be a cover and it would need a lot of headlines. This is in Botswana as a reed cutter. So I've photographed this image from a Makuru, a dugout wooden boat. And I think that helps because there's a looking up aspect to it where photographers like Rodchenko had used this in Soviet times when you look up and you hero a subject. And I like bringing historical references into the work that I'm doing. This lady, I was very, very lucky. I was photographing again in Kenya, and I was speaking to the guy that was preparing the lamps outside my tent one day, and I asked him what he was doing over the weekend, and he said, oh, there's a wedding in the local village. And of course, as soon as I heard that, I was like, I've got to go to this wedding. I really would love to go to a Maasai wedding. And we managed to get permission to go in, and the groom, the man, he was very happy for me to photograph him, full of bravado with his friends, and that was pretty straightforward. But the bride was very shy. And she literally allowed me 4 or 5 seconds to get this image, and then she went off and got married. There's a nice story about this as well, which I think I'll have some pictures later. I went back 2 years later and presented her with her wedding pictures, so better late than never. This is in Papua New Guinea. This boy was my local taxi driver. Where I was staying was on a small island, and where the vehicle was to get around, we had to use these little dugout canoes, and each morning he'd come and pick me up. Perseverance sometimes is important, not sometimes, a lot of the time in what I do. This is in the Congo, and I was there to publicize a brand new lodge that was opening up, and it was people would go there to see gorillas, but it was in the very early days of this lodge, so it was pretty basic. And I wanted a double-page magazine opening image, and I knew that the Congo River was going to be important to the story. And when we got there, the weather was terrible, and these two guys just didn't really want to be there. It was getting cold, and then it started raining. But I managed to persuade them to stay because I had a feeling that, and I'd seen it over the last few days, heavy rain would come and then sun would come. So I'm on another boat tied to a fallen log, a fallen branch in the water. And just waited, just sat there and waited, and then eventually, you know, perseverance, we got the shot that I was after. Sometimes people go home too early, I think. This is China, and sometimes you go to places and everything's done for you. The red lanterns, the red in the boat, the light, it was all there. But one thing I've learned is that the harder you work, the luckier you get. 2 pictures that have been very good for me. The lady on the left, part of the Himba tribe in northern Namibia, and the guy on the right is in Cameroon, West Africa. I'm going to talk about these pictures a bit later, so I won't go on too much about them. This is about a graphic design, really. I love the influence and the simplicity of old posters, especially travel posters, where they had to get a message across very quickly. And I think you can do that in photography as well, and see all the empty space there for words. But I actually think, even without words, the empty space is important to show the scale. I was talking earlier about bringing in different techniques. And although, yes, I'm photographing, this guy is in the Omo Valley, a part of the Musi tribe of Ethiopia, I wanted to photograph him using a fashion lighting technique. Because of the way he dressed, his appearance was very, very important to him. And I wanted that feeling of the adornment and how proud he was of how he looked to come across in the way that I photographed it.
And I think sometimes if you want to be a certain type of photographer, the best thing to do is look at the opposite. If you want to photograph flowers, look how they photograph cars and see what you can learn. I think cross-genre and using different techniques is very interesting. And of course, India now, this is Rajasthan. I could have a whole portfolio on India. The colours are just beautiful. It's a lovely place to work as well. Again, this next picture of these ladies, I did a story following the monsoon rains of the southwest coast of India for Land Rover, and we wanted to see how people behaved just before the rains came. All the tourists have gone, all the visitors have gone, and it's very beautiful in a way that all of these tourist destinations, this is Trivandrum in Kerala, they become back. They get given back to the local population to enjoy. That's kind of how I feel. And it was so humid though. Everyone was just really keen to get in the water to cool off. This is in Kashmir, in the Indian side of Dal Lake in Kashmir. Again, you always see this empty space and simple colour theory being involved. This image is at the Jenny Mosque in Mali, West Africa. I knew I wanted to photograph this mosque, and you can just see it here in the background, but I also knew that if I got there on market day, it would have more interest, more going on. But I was very concerned that I would stand out as a foreign photographer trying to photograph these people in their daily lives. And so I asked my guide what we could do, and we eventually hired a market stall that had been closed. So there was a lot of market stalls that were open, and then there were 2 or 3 that were just covered in canvas. And I hired one of those, and I literally just took pictures from being inside it, and nobody was aware I was there. But it allowed me to observe life as it was. One of the things about this image, which is why I've put it in, is a chance to talk about micro composition. You see the girl's lips and nose, and how the stick that's just in front of her follows that shape. That's called micro composition, and it's about making sure when you're taking pictures you're looking in all the corners all the time. A picture within a picture, I guess. This is in Spitsbergen, Arctic Norway. The ship is called the Nordic Light. It's a Danish ship. No, it's not Danish. I apologise. It's a Dutch schooner, and they used to freeze it in the ice every year, and it will become almost a hotel, if you like, but they used to freeze it in the same way that historically it had been done by Scott and Shackleton and all these guys. But unfortunately, in the last few years, due to climate change, they haven't been able to freeze it. But it's a very beautiful place to visit if you get the chance. Good for polar bear watching. This is in Sana'a, Yemen. One of the things I've noticed the more I do this job is that I'm a historical witness to places that change. Sana'a has been bombed very heavily in recent years. This was pre that bombing, and I almost don't want to go back to see what's become of it, because it's such a historical, beautiful city. And when the mosques start their call to prayer, it's really haunting. I knew I wanted this view, and so I managed to find a place to stay that had one of the highest balconies in Sana'a. This is again in Yemen. Lots of people think it's somewhere, in the Caribbean or sort of Mauritius, but no, it's off the southern coast of Yemen. And the last ones that are coming up here, I was very fortunate a few years ago to win Travel Photographer of the Year, and it was for 2 stories, and this was one of them. This is in Lalibela in Ethiopia. I've been a few times to this place, and it's a photographer's dream. Life goes on there it's not for you. The life there is about one of pilgrimage, but you can observe and you can just watch daily life go on. And they have these beautiful old churches cut bare into the rock. They've got 6th century frescoes inside, and there's no health and safety, no big signage, no vantage points, no cafes. It's not for you, it's for them, and it's a place of pilgrimage, but you're very welcome to go there. And this again is out of the picture I showed before. This was part of the Himba, this lady. What was interesting about photographing her was that you have to be careful when you're photographing people of indigenous cultures, is that you don't go there and steal a picture and then run off. You don't run up to somebody, take a picture, and then go. It should be much closer than that. It should be more of a collaboration. This girl was very aware of her own image, and I asked her if I could photograph her, and then as soon as I did a couple of frames, you could see she wanted to look in the back of the camera. So I showed her, and she started to adjust how she looked, and then she went back and we did it again. And it was a very nice thing. I think we both felt that we got something out of it, and I sent her some prints after. And it's very nice to collaborate with your subjects rather than sometimes just be guilty of stealing what you want and they don't get anything from it. I always think it's very good if the person you're photographing has got something from it. And that's not monetary, I mean, but something in the experience. So BTS, behind the scenes. This is where you get to actually see the silly hats I've worn over the years, I think. So this is all part of a job I did in Zambia, where I was videoing and doing stills. I do a lot of video now. Probably 40% of what I do is motion. Sometimes we do it at the same time. Sometimes it's done afterwards. So you can see a little bit here about the equipment that I've got, and I'll come on to a bit more of that in a bit. I take what I need. Sometimes it ends up feeling like more than you need, but you do need it. And I spend a lot of time packing and repacking, trying to work out what it is we actually need. Sometimes I'm on my own. Sometimes I'm with a journalist, like I was in this case. Sometimes I can be working with a very large crew of 20, 30 people. It depends on what I'm doing. So this is me in Norway. We have to go through a lot of different temperature changes in what we do. And when I first started, I wanted to go to Siberia, but I wanted to make sure, and I was shooting on film on a Hasselblad then, I wanted to make sure that I could work in the cold. And okay, so you guys in Sweden, you're used to it, but us, we're not used to working at -20 or -30. And I knew that the film would sometimes snap and go brittle. So I went to a supermarket cold store and I trained in there. I'd go in there for 3 hours once a week for about 8 weeks and just test all the cameras and see what happened to them at very cold temperatures. It's easier now. I mean, on film it was harder, I suppose. This is Machu Picchu in Peru. The reason I'm wearing such a ridiculous looking poncho is that the plan was to stay when everyone else had gone and to get a picture with no people. And with a certain kind of light. Now the problem with that would be that I needed a tripod, and they wouldn't let me take a tripod. So I was doing a job and I had to get the picture. So I bought the biggest poncho I could so I could hide a tripod inside it. So though I don't advocate breaking the rules. This is in the Congo. Sometimes when you're photographing gorillas and things, obviously you have to be very careful that you don't give them your diseases. So hence the mask before they were COVID fashionable. And this is the picture that I took, not with that lens, I hasten to add. If I was on a 70 to 200, I would have been pretty close. This was done on, I believe, a 300 or maybe 400mm lens, this silverback. This is in Spitsbergen, working here on a Hasselblad. And frozen lakes get really uncomfortable after a while. I've worked a lot from aeroplanes and helicopters, and of course now we have drones as well. But it's still much better to not use a drone, in my opinion. You get so many different choices if you're in a helicopter, and you can use different focal lengths and things. So things are changing, and we do use drones now. But I suppose I quite like the adventure of being in the helicopter or in the plane when you're taking the pictures. This is a Hasselblad again. This is in Venezuela. This is trying to drive across Serengeti and Tanzania side for a job. Things aren't always as comfortable as you'd think. People sometimes ask me, oh, you must be very lucky you stay in lots of lovely, glamorous hotels and everything's paid for. Well, that does happen sometimes, but quite often I'm just in a tent as well. This is at the top of a very famous mountain in Venezuela, and we went up by helicopter, and we were told that they'd pick us up in 4 days if the weather was good. So we camped at the top to make a film about the aviator Jimmy Angel. One of the things people don't see when we're working is that at the end of the day, you've still got to put all the data onto hard drives and back it up. probably 2, sometimes 3 times. And you can see the equipment I've got there. So that's for 2 people, myself and my assistant. And that is a small amount of kit for what we take sometimes. And I tell you, we go as light as we can. But sometimes you might be working on a boat, sometimes you might be doing video, you might have to light things. We never quite know what we're walking into, so we have to make sure we have a basic kit that gets us through that. And the other thing about doing cards and things at night is that certainly if you're on a safari location with a lot of wildlife around, you don't really want to be doing it in pitch dark. You want to be able to see what's going on. So this is apart from a video shoot in Tanzania. This is what I was saying about the embarrassment of silly hats that I've worn over the years. I often have an audience when I'm working. It's part of what we do, and I think, you know, it should be a little bit of theatre to these people when you're photographing them. So this next shot, this is me going back to Amboseli and letting the bride have her wedding pictures 2 years later than promised, but she got them in the end. So this is a slightly different way of working. Over my years, I've been asked to do quite a lot of advertising as well. This was an ad for British Airways, and you can see how we created the mist in the background to get it. And so sometimes when you're doing advertising, it's very different. It's not just me and a 35mm camera or whatever. It can be a much bigger team. And sometimes we shoot directly into a laptop so everybody can see what we're doing. I generally use Canons, if people ask, a lot of the time now, but here I'm using a phase 1 100 megapixel camera. I tend to use whatever is right for the job. I don't really have any affiliation to any particular brand. It's whatever's right for what I'm doing. And there was the ad that I shot. Finding inspiration. I get asked a lot how I find inspiration, because I feel very lucky to do what I do, but I'm also very driven, and a lot of it comes from when I was very young, inspiration from painting. This painting was on our wall when I was a kid. A print of this painting was on our wall when I was a child, and I don't think it really resonated with me at the time, but later I discovered how much I'd got from this painting about the dream, the romance of travel, and the way that light is used. And then I started to think about other things that I like. So what I do now, if I'm looking for inspiration, and I tell people this when I'm doing workshops as well, is find all the things that you like. You don't have to justify why you like it, but visual things that interest you, and put them together in a folder. And when you start doing that, you'll start to see the kind of things that you like, the kind of taste that you have, and things that inspire you. Now, so this is a random pick of things, and I do this all the time. And it's always being updated. I just keep putting things into the folder. So I've written a few things here that I think, things that I've learned. And it's about understand yourself. So the last one, the last pictures show the things that I like. And understand the work of others. Look at the work of others. We not just your contemporaries, not just the people you work with now, but the history of not just photography, the history of all visual art, whether it be painting, sculpture, a film, of course. All of these things have an influence on what we can do. Learn a new skill. If you've never photographed still life, or you've never done something like food photography, if you're interested in photography, have a go. You'll learn something from it. And that's a new style of photography you should be doing. And you know, the mantra of go somewhere new is always, to me, what drives me. I love going to places for the first time, but I also love showing somebody else that I've gone to. And the last one here, remember why you fell in love with photography is what I mean. Why you got interested in photography in the first place. So when I started, a lot of my influence came from painting, and it came from different movements, but particularly a very bright, colourful movement called Fauvism. And there's people like Matisse in here as well, as Sarah. And my early work was very inspired by this kind of paintings. And I actually used to draw I should draw the photographs I wanted to make, because coming from art school, that's all I knew. So there's always been a connection between a drawn thing, a painted thing, and photography. So this is some of my very early work, and you can see here the influence of that colour theory that comes into what I do and what I like. It's changing all the time. This was, a long time ago. Before I shoot, people ask me, do you do a lot of preparation? I do. I do a lot of preparation, but the most important one is in my mind. It's in my head. That's the important thing. Get the headspace right. Try not to be too stressed, and believe in yourself, and also know that you've done enough homework. You've done what you should do before you go somewhere. So I was asked just before lockdown to go and do a story about Rudyard Kipling, The Jungle Book. There was a new film coming out, and I thought it would be really interesting to go back and look at the films. So I looked at the new film, and I looked at the old 1960s film, and started to take influence from it. So I started looking at the lighting, the way it was framed. The thing about cartoons or early illustration is they, again, have to get a message across very, very quickly. And I could have looked at pictures of India, photographs of India, but I wanted to be inspired by the cartoons and the original stories behind it. So then this is what I came back with. So you'll see here Shere Khan, the tiger, and King Louis's temple, and then the little boy, Mowgli, going towards the man village. So I wanted to take inspiration from that. So I will often do this. Before I go somewhere, I will look at other photographs that have been done there, but I'll also look at films and music and other things that have inspired other genres of creativity. So this was before I went to China, and you saw one of the pictures earlier. I looked at a lot of traditional Chinese art and how it had been done and the compositions, and thought, well, if I went back to these locations that they talked about in this art, did it exist, or was it just in the imagination of the artists? The illustration in the middle was credited as being in the Yellow Mountains, and I knew that you have mountains like that there, and you get trees like that there. So could I be influenced by this when I went and took my pictures? So then this is where this picture came about, West Lake. But when I got there, I knew that wildlife was important in traditional Chinese art, and I knew that this pavilion had been painted a lot before. And the weather was perfect for what I wanted. It was flat light, it was very overcast, and normally with photography you think that's a disaster, you don't want that. But for me it was perfect for that kind of look. Colour temperature is really important here. It started to go blue already. That's just the way the sensors read the colour temperature. So I just didn't correct it. I kept that blue look on it. But once I photographed to start with, once I started taking pictures, I was a bit concerned that it just looked like other things I'd seen. I'd seen other photographers take this picture. And then I started looking back at thinking about my research. And one of the first things I looked at was Chinese pottery. And one of the pots that I'd looked at had broken and been glued back together quite badly in a museum. So I took that as my influence, and I actually photographed this with the idea that it was fragmented, it was a broken piece of porcelain. And I like using those kind of things, whatever it takes to be different, because I think there is too much, especially in our new Instagram world, there's too much of people just copying everyone else, and it's like collecting stamps. It's once you've got it, well, then move on and find something different. Don't do the same as everybody else. There's more and you get more enjoyment from it when you challenge yourself a bit more. So this again, this next image is in the Yellow Mountains in China. So by taking influence from the painting for artists, my composition was going to be different, and that's interesting for me. It's challenging, and I get excited by that. So that's how these came about. I showed you earlier. These pictures came about, how many elements I could take away and still come back with a triptych, a series of 3 pictures that would tell me what I wanted to show about this place, West Lake, but also hint on its past of Chinese art and an inspiration for Chinese art. Okay, keeping mood boards. I love doing this. I'm constantly looking at other people's work, and when I see things that I like, I just screen grab it. And I put them into folders, and some of these pictures have been around in my mind since I very began. The top right hand side of the couple in Paris, sort of 1920s, I've had that picture in my mind for years. And the girl at the festival in San Francisco at the bottom right hand side, these pictures have resonated with me for a long time. And I keep going back to them when I'm not sure what I should be doing. And it's about a mood board of inspiration, if you like. And there are films that do this for me too. These are all from different films. And I think that there's something about all of these images that I love. I don't really need to explain why I like them. It's just that they inspire me. It might be the lighting, definitely the composition in some of these. The bottom left of the train from Dr. Zhivago actually reminds me of a Turner painting that I love. And then the way in film they call it blocking, but the people that you put in a scene, bottom right in the Western, that composition to me is inspiring. And I want to remember these things when I'm taking pictures myself. And so I keep these mood boards. I don't, look back at them very often, but when I do feel like, where am I going with this? Or to remember why I fell in love with photography, these things come back. Okay, I'm going to speed it up a little bit now. So we're going to talk about light. Light is incredibly important to me. It's from painting onwards again. Here we have Caravaggio on the left, one of the leaders of light. I can't say enough how painting is very useful as a photographer to take inspiration from. Not just on the colour theory, but the way that it's used. Again, I like lighting when it's... lighting should be motivated by what you see. So going back to the picture of the Maasai bride, I wanted it to be sentimental. I wanted it to feel romantic. It was her wedding day, so I lit it in that way. And the way that this film still is made, the way that the whole scene is lit is motivated by the fact she's got a lamp. So it's always good to keep these things in mind. Coming back to another one of mine again, I knew that I wanted this look. And so what the influence that I had was that I asked the gaucho man, the cowboy, to do his normal morning roundup an hour and a half earlier than he would have done, because I could calculate where the sun would be, and I also knew that would create backlit dust. The dog was a bonus. He just came along for the fun, I think. So we talked about different lighting. This is again using silver reflectors. Sometimes I don't light things very much. I do use light sometimes, but most of my work is all daylight, probably 95%. But I do use a lot of reflectors. So white reflector, silver reflector, gold reflectors. Sometimes we don't have them with us, so we just use a piece of white paper, or we take the sheet off the bed. I've used all different kinds of things. And if you want to soften light, I've learned how to do that using like a shower curtain borrowed from the hotel and then obviously replaced. Different types of lighting, different situations. Stormy lights, you can have backlighting. In the desert, you get a beautiful twilight once the sun's gone down, kind of golden light that you get in those sort of places. I love working with that too. Venezuela, we talked about earlier. This is actually an 8-minute exposure. But I had to get a picture. We arrived, it was raining, it was dark, but I also knew that the magazine were going to headline about something about mystery. They wanted Angel Falls and this story of Jimmy Angel to be full of mystery. So the long exposure, letting the clouds blur, helped me. And sometimes when you have to get a picture, you work that bit harder and you come back with interesting results. This is using window light. And I think that, again, just about understanding light, seeing light and controlling it. I hope this is not going too fast, but I'll flick through a few more. Spotlight. So the young monk in Burma on the left in Myanmar, I was watching other novice monks walk through this little patch of light. So I just waited and focused on that patch of light and waited until people come through. The guy on the right, purely lit by the ground. The sun was so hard, it was bouncing off the ground, going into his face. But I put him inside of his hut. That kept the background and everything else very dark. Okay, so I'm going to go through, otherwise it'll be a bit fast now. This is in Arctic Norway. Again, keeping it simple. Back to painting. Always back to painting. Look at the compositions and the light. Okay, they could make it up. They didn't have to record it. But it's beautiful observation and great use of a painter understanding what light can look like. And we can get this. It does happen. Okay, composition. I normally talk a lot more about this in workshops and things, but composition is something that I'm very keen to explain, because you can lead the viewer. You can tell that person that's looking at your work where you want them to look. And you can break down pictures of why are they good and why do they work. And a lot of it is because of composition. Then once you know those compositional guidelines, break them. Then the most important thing is, I think it's really important to be in technical control of what you do, but then to have fun with it. Now, normally you would put someone's eyes looking into the empty space. It gives them somewhere to look. But you can go the other way. You can break these rules to bring a bit of tension into pictures too. Height of eye line is really important as well. By taking the same eye line as your subject, it changes things. And you see so many wildlife pictures, particularly all done from a high vehicle standpoint. I understand why it happens. You can't always go out in the savannah lands and lie down, but when you get to that eye line, it changes everything, whether it's people or animals. So once you've got these ideas in your mind, break those rules again. So I'm not at their eye line now. This is in Bolivia, and I wanted to emphasize the beautiful padded skirts that these ladies wear in Bolivia. So by taking a very low angle, it did two things. Going low made them stand out against the intense blue of the sky, but also it made them the same triangle as a mountain that was behind them. And I love, again, it's a little bit to do with micro composition as well, and finding these subjects. I always thought in this next picture, I like the elephant, looked like the elephant had just blown that bird out of his trunk. But again, it's about, you don't have to fill the frame with the subject. Let it breathe a little bit in its space. When I photographed this, I really wanted the magazine I was working for to use it like this. So I didn't give them a choice. I actually photographed it in camera like this. So there wasn't any more. If they came back and asked for it, it didn't exist. I wanted them to do it this way. And most of my pictures, I don't mind my work being cropped, but most of it is in camera as you see it. This didn't need anything. Her story about this lady in Cambodia, barefoot on a broken down old motorcycle with the most beautiful smile. It was all there. I didn't need to be clever with composition or clever with longer lenses or wider lenses. It's all about what's right for the subject at the time. And I know it feels like I'm contradicting myself, but the fact is, once you've learned all these rules, you can then make a decision on the best technique to use. There is no sort of golden way of doing something. It's just about experience. But it's also about understanding, when you break down the picture, what's necessary and what's needed. Breaking down the elements. There was a painting in my mood board by an artist called Ford Maddox Brown, and it's of a parents going over to the New World on a ship for the first time, going over to the Americas, and you didn't know they had their daughter with them until you looked really close and you saw a little foot. So I remember that when I took this picture in Papua New Guinea. Okay, colour theory. I've got to go really quick now. I've talked for too long. Colour theory is something really important. Once you understand it, you can really enjoy it. Opposite colours make them seem brighter and they complement each other. Here we have Van Gogh, yellow against blue, an obvious way. One comes forward, one goes back visually. Again, here we have red and green, opposite colours in the spectrum, but you can use them to your advantage. Obviously, an important picture for today as well, actually, being Remembrance Day. Monet did this, Constable did this. They use a little bit of reds and it makes the greens feel brighter. Here's an obvious way to do it in photography. Again, as well, colour theory is really important if you can just use a little bit of it. You don't want everything to be a clash of colours. Sometimes it can be too much. This guy is in Chile, in the Atacama Desert, selling ice cream to not many people that drove past. But I love the washed outness of this image, and I wanted it to have that kind of theory to it. And then this is in very much a painterly way of taking pictures with the colour theory. those greens work because of the child in the red. And I think that to understand that sort of thing, it is really important. And here's a picture of mine, which I think it wouldn't have worked as well if it wasn't for the colours, the yellow, the green and the red. Well, I think I've spoken for quite a long time now. You're probably all a bit tired, but I'll just see what comes up next. So again, very much a constable composition, people working. Looking back at my mood boards, there was this picture of in the Western of all these people in silhouette, and it's about how you position people and knowing when to take the picture. These are not set up pictures, but it's about knowing when to get to know when you're being lucky, and to know when you're being lucky and to make the most of it. I think that's a big secret to success. Okay, fit for purpose is the last section, and this is about what I do for a job. So although, yes, I do workshops from time to time, most of my time is spent working in the field of commercial photography. So I have to think about other things to some of the other guys, and so I'm always thinking about how it's going to be finally used. And does it tell the story? Does it tell the narrative? The lioness on the right here is actually she's being chased by a crocodile. That's why she has that determined look on her face, and she did survive. And that is the mother on the left at the cover. She's watching her daughter. So that's why I could be so close without them reacting to me. It's because she was concerned about her daughter. And here we have a lot of the pictures I was talking about Machu Picchu without any people, and about the shrouds of mystery in Venezuela, and all that negative empty space for words. I always liked the way that the designer laid this out, because it almost felt like it was one picture. And that's because I'd taken in my mind when I was photographing this story that we would use a similar colour palette throughout. It would be this burnt sienna, this kind of dark browns and yellows, and the way that designers put these together I think works really well. And coming from a graphic background, I really appreciate it when the design art direction team, I think, get it absolutely right. Again, when I was photographing this guy, I knew that he would be over to one side so that there was place for it to be a double page spread. Colour theory again, I decided on this one in Essaouira in Morocco that I would keep every town that I photographed, give it its own colour palette, and I thought that was a nice way to separate out the places. This is coming back to that advertising job I was telling you about. So this was for British Airways, and you can see here, in fact I'm in the picture in the bottom left as I test out the lighting. This was where we have to make it look like we've just found the perfect scene, but in fact we've got a big flashlight hidden in a tree, which you can see in one of those pictures, and guys with leaf blowers creating the mist, so that in the end it looks like you've just found it. And that's kind of a lot of what I do. But a lot of the ways that I've learned to work come from working in travel and working very, very fast, understanding light. This is one and only resort, Gorilla's Nest. As I said earlier, it's difficult to categorize the kind of work that I do. It's more about the way I do it, I think. And so what One and Only Resorts were interested in was finding a photographer that could photograph and film, because I was doing video as well, landscapes and wildlife and hotels and people. Now, to me, I don't separate them all out. I think they all have interest and are fun to do. So to me, I enjoy doing all aspects of that work. And that's what I want to do. I don't want to do the same thing day in, day out. I like being inspired to go to new places, see new things. This is the last slide of my work. This is a film that I made at the very beginning of lockdown. My last ever trip before everything stopped was in Arctic Norway, and it went on to do really well. So if you get a chance, look at it. It's on my website. And now I'm just going to end with what I've learned. Oh, I'm still learning. So what I would say is, certainly for photographers, young photographers starting out, be careful of social media. I say that, I use social media, I'm on it. But But photographers and very much social media has a way of making things look better than they are. So the journey is with you. Don't compete with too many other people, because it's your journey. People are very good at making themselves look good. That's what photographers do. They make their work look good. It doesn't actually mean that they're any happier or that they're actually, doing any better. It's your journey. Work hard. Effort brings better rewards. And surround yourself with good people. I think that's really important, because if you've got good people around you, they'll inspire you. And take time to think and ask questions, which leads me on to an email that I've just received about questions from some of you guys. Do I have any dream destinations that I haven't visited yet? Well, yes, quite a lot actually. Although I've been very lucky to go to a lot of places, there's a few big gaps, and one of them is Mozambique. I've talked about going to Mozambique many times. I've never quite got there. And the other one's the Philippines. I've never been to the Philippines. That really interests me. Again, it's been so over on social media, but I still think there's a much more interesting side to a drone shot of a boat and a palm tree to be had in the Philippines. I'd love to go and explore that area. How important is equipment? Well, without it, you can't do much. But I'm not obsessive about equipment. I like good equipment that is strong and works well. But it's more important of what you point that equipment at. You need the basics, but you also need to know what you can do with the restrictions that you have. If you only have one lens, well, that's fine. Lots of amazing photographers have done amazing things with one lens. You just change the way, you work with what you've got, I guess is what you're trying to say. Do things ever go wrong? Yes, things often go wrong. And in fact, the first thing I think about when somebody asks me to go somewhere is what can go wrong. And then from there, I plan backwards. So I think, what will go wrong if it snows all the time? Or what will go wrong if my camera gets stolen? What will go wrong if the car breaks down? And I'm trying to work out all these things so that we have a plan B as much as we can have in all those things. And especially now working on digital, we need so many cables and leads, and to think that your whole shoot could be destroyed because you don't have a USB-C card lead or whatever, it's quite terrifying. So we check things a lot. But things do go wrong. Like I said, when you're being lucky, exploit it. And when it's all going wrong, have another plan, because certain things you can't change. Weather being one of them. And the last question here is, what do you do in trying to photograph somewhere that's been photographed a lot before? This happens a lot. I would say take the picture that has been taken before first, get it out of the way, and then that's done. And then start to experiment. When you look at people's work of a famous place, you can almost tell where they've taken it from, and it's often a very easy place. It will be a vantage point. It will be, the top of some steps. It'll be standing on a bench. So you've got to go that bit harder. Where does this place reflect? Does it reflect into windows? Does it reflect into water? What happens if I lie down? What happens if I climb up even higher? What happens if I go in that tree? You have to think as many different ways as you can, and then within that journey, you will find something that's different. Sometimes places can't be different, as in, the Eiffel Tower is always going to be the Eiffel Tower, but you can tell other stories that relate to it by the way you shoot it. And maybe it's people's connection with the Eiffel Tower, or whether it's architecture. You just have to keep trying for different things. Well, that's me. Thank you for taking the time out in your evening to listen to me. And hopefully, maybe I'll see one of you guys that is listening in on one of the tours one day. And if you're interested, go over to Cyberphoto, and hopefully I'll see you somewhere in the world. Okay, thanks a lot. Take care. Good night.